So for those of you new to ITSM Academy, here's a quick overview. ITSM Academy is a full-service provider of IT service management education. We develop all our content in-house. That includes all ITIL education as well as process design, Agile, and DevOps. Since 2003, we've trained and certified tens of thousands of students. Now let me introduce today's speaker, John Worthington. John is an IT veteran with more than 30 years of executive experience, half of it dedicated to IT service management. As CEO and principal of My Service Monitor, he assisted clients in adapting service lifecycle processes by leveraging EG Enterprise Performance Monitoring Solutions. He went on to assignments with Third Sky and VMware. He has numerous industry certifications, including ITIL Expert and DevOps. John has more than a decade of experience helping customers leverage monitoring intelligence as a key enabler of IT transformation. Good morning, John, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Karen. And I can't tell you, I am excited to be working with my friends at ITSM Academy again. So I'm looking forward to today's session.
Yes, we are too, John. Are you ready for me to make you the presenter?
Yes, let me know when you can see my slides, and you can obviously hear me, so I'm ready to go when you are.
Okay. And I can see your slides.
Okay, great. Thank you and welcome, everyone. Today I get to talk about two of my favorite subjects, monitoring and IT transformation. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. So before I begin, just a few brief words about EG Innovations before I get started. EG Innovations is a provider of performance management solutions. We have over 1,000 customers across the globe and have won many awards over the years. But here's basically what we do. We provide performance management solutions that take measurements at every layer of every component in an end-to-end IT service. We automatically learn the norms of all measurements that we collect, and through a patented data flow and dependency-based analytics, we'll automatically isolate which layer of which component is the source of a performance issue. Now today we do this across any deployment model, public, private, or hybrid cloud, and from code to bare metal. So that's a little bit about us. Today our agenda is pretty simple. I want to start by getting a clear definition of transformational change first. Then let's identify what part of IT monitoring we'll be focusing on. Monitoring is a pretty complex and very broad area, so we'll probably need to set some boundaries for today's discussion. And then we'll move on to describe the role that monitoring can play in IT transformations using IT service management and ITIL best practice, as well as some DevOps examples. And we'll try and show you how you can leverage monitoring as part of either a service management or DevOps transformation plan. There is a companion white paper available that maps to our webinar. So if you would let us know, we'll go ahead and send you a link. And I think we have a poll that Karen, you're going to take to see if anyone wants to? Okay.
Yes, I do, John. Thank you. All right. So as John said, he has a companion white paper. So if you would like it, just click yes. And we'll make sure that you get that after the webinar. Okay. Well, John, we've got almost 90%.
All right.
Want the paper. Okay.
Great. Great.
All right. If you haven't made your selection, do so now. I'm going to close the poll. And there we go. So 89%, John, wanted that paper.
Wonderful.
So thank you very much, people.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Mm-hmm. All right. So we're hearing a lot about transformation these days, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about digital transformation or IT transformation. Transformation is definitely a hot buzzword. But we have similar challenges with its definition as we do with DevOps, actually, it can be hard to really pin down. So I'm going to leverage what I have found are a couple of really great resources I found along the way, and I'll share these with you at the end of the session. So there are three types of organizational change: developmental, transitional, and transformational. Developmental change is the simplest. It improves something that already exists rather than creating something new. So an example might include a process improvement to an existing process, or problem solving and training. Those are examples of developmental change. Transitional change replaces what is with something completely new. So it requires designing and implementing a new state. So an example here might be establishing a process in an organization that didn't exist before. Now, transformational change is more complicated. We don't know what the final state will look like when we start along a transformational change path. And most important is that it requires changes in mindsets, behavior, and culture. And this is the most difficult type of change and takes the longest to achieve. So a transformational change is really strategic in nature and really should be driven from the top of the organization. So for example, you can see the words wake up a call. And I love the analogy. If you're familiar with Cotter's book, My Iceberg is Melting, you know, when the penguins realize their iceberg is melting, they've just had a wake-up call, right? And of course, the trick is you need to make sure that the powers that be hear the wake-up call as well, right? So that's sometimes the challenge with transformation or transformational change. The transformation plan, which is essentially an organizational development plan, drives the formation of transition programs. And these might have to deal with boundary issues such as establishing a cross-functional process or defining services that span organizational boundaries. These kinds of programs have to deal with the associated management of diverse stakeholders. Now, transitional change focuses on what Implementation Management Associates calls implementation, which is making sure the business and human objectives of the program are met, versus installation. Within each program of work, there might be multiple projects, and these may focus on improvements to existing processes or installation of tools and automation. Projects tend to focus on the technical, budget, and schedule objectives. And so this is one of the reasons why an integrated approach to people, process, and tools is so important for transformational change. So from an IT perspective, IT service management and ITIL can help drive shifts in mindsets to a services orientation, for example, while DevOps tends to build on ITIL's foundation and focuses, I think, a little more on cultural issues, collaboration, continuous learning, and so forth. And so if you look on at the figure on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see a diagram from ITIL's Continual Service Improvement publication. And you can see it illustrates the relationship between the plan, do, check, act cycle in the middle and the data to information to knowledge to wisdom cycle, which is in the four corners. And then of course we've got the 7-step improvement process shown as well. Now each of these cycles occur at different levels of organizational change. So we'd have the transformation path, maybe setting a vision and strategy, maybe helping to define what culture change is needed and why. And this might trigger programs of work and transitional change to the organization. Each of these programs would spawn projects. And the collaboration and feedback between these is what ITIL would refer to as knowledge spirals. So an effective monitoring environment can help accelerate the DIKW cycle and amplify and accelerate feedback. And these are principles associated with IT service management and DevOps. What monitoring does is it collects raw data and it places that data in context, such as a service-oriented context. And this begins to create information. And in the monitoring space, we call this visibility, and it's a very big part of what monitoring does. But as we analyze the information, we learn what to do with it. And this is what creates knowledge. And this is the basis of transparency. And if we're looking to change people's behavior and culture, this is critically important. But I want to get back to the definition of transformational change just for a minute. Take a look at this definition of IT transformation from a TechTarget blog that I saw. I'm not sure that words like rip and replace are necessarily going to be reassuring to IT staff. And I couldn't help but also notice that the definition as shown here, it really takes the perspective of the technology systems. Nowhere in the definition does it mention people. Transformational change is very much about people. So I did some research and took a look at a couple of books I've leveraged in the past that were really around organizational development. They take an organizational development perspective of transformation. And the books Beyond Change Management and the Change Leader's Handbook, I've really found to be very useful resources. And if you notice one of the quotes, implementations, right, those business and human objectives that we talked about, often fail because the mindset and culture changes don't occur. Now, why is that? Because the new systems require people to share information across strongly held boundaries or put the needs of the enterprise over their own turf agendas. And I will tell you, this directly relates to many of the experiences I've had around IT monitoring, as we'll see as we move forward. So transformation is really about organizational development. Its scope includes all aspects of organizational life. It's values-based, it's collaborative, and leverages behavioral science. It's very much about people and their organizational life, including the processes, tools, and other people that they work with. And so I have to give a shout out to Jane Grohl at ITSM Academy for the recent continuous people pipeline webinar that she did, which you can see, by the way, on the ITSM Academy archives. It was really spot on, I think, and definitely worth a look. So IT transformation is about organizational development. People are at its heart, and building trust is critical in achieving this. And transparency is critical to trust. So before we move on, I think, Karen, I think we've got our first poll. So
yes, we do. All right. You ready, John?
Yep, go ahead.
Okie doke. Okay, so how does your organization manage transformational change today? Do you have a transformation office? Do you have a service management office? Do you have a DevOps organizational unit? Or maybe you have no formal structure or other? Please make your selection on that. And thank you for the shout out on Jane's webinar, John.
Oh, no problem.
Okay. Got about half the people have voted. Well, they're still coming in quickly though, John.
Yep. No worries.
I will say that no formal structure is taking the lead.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Is that what you expected?
Pretty much.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. I'm going to close the poll in a couple more seconds, so finish your selections, please. Okay. Closing the poll. And here we have 45% no formal structure exists, John. 24% has a service management office. 12% is other, but has nobody chatted anything. If you want us to know the other, if you want to chat it in, that's fine. And then we have a tie at 9% for having a transformation office and having a DevOps organizational unit.
Interesting. I think the formal structure sometimes may often not be visible. There usually is a governance process in place, but clearly managing transformational changes in organizational development are going to need governance levers. So that's interesting. All right, so now that we've placed transformation in the context of other types of organizational change, let's go ahead and take a dive into monitoring and see what monitoring is all about. All right, so as I said earlier, monitoring is not only complex, it's a very broad-based activity. It takes place almost everywhere, right? So we need to monitor our people, we need to track skill sets, training, performance management. They're all very important to IT transformation, and they need to be carefully monitored. And of course, we need to monitor processes, whether they're program or project management processes or business or IT processes. Each of these need to be measured and monitored. And of course, technology needs to be measured and monitored as well, including IT services and the supporting applications and infrastructure. And this is where our primary focus for today's webinar is going to be, is on the monitoring of IT services and the associated application and infrastructure technologies. So what technology monitoring has to do is really connect the dots between service abstractions, the abstract notion of an IT service, and the underlying components. And so we need to do this both between these components, or configuration items if you prefer that term, and we also need to do it within these components. So for example, it's important to know how the data travels along the service model, but we also need to understand that there are layers within each of these components that have to be monitored as well. For example, the operating system is dependent on a network layer and so on. So what technology monitoring does is it helps us answer many questions like, what's the cause of a performance issue? What's happening at this exact moment in time? What is the trend? Did my test pass if I'm up earlier in the life cycle? Are there security threats? What's the impact of a change? Who should be notified? What action should I take? And many, many more. So there's almost an unlimited number of use cases for monitoring, which is why there's literally hundreds of different monitoring tools, and many of these overlap with each other. So there's stress testing tools and debugging and optimization tools, infrastructure monitors, application monitors, project and program monitoring, diagnostic tools and sniffers, administrative tools. For example, they might be device specific. So I might have a network monitor, a database monitor, so forth. Even alarm and notification management sometimes gets lumped into a monitoring portfolio. And these tools are used by many different people and within many different processes and for different purposes along the service lifecycle. So if you're familiar with Conway's law, you can see why many monitoring environments mirror how the IT organization is organized. And in case, if you're not familiar with Conway's law, what Conway's law suggests is that organizations that design systems are typically constrained to designs that are copies of the communication structures of those organizations, right? So we have these multiple monitoring products, and they tend to be organized around silos. So we have a network group, a web group, an app group, database group. We might even have dev and ops silos and so forth. So monitoring environments are sometimes, I would argue more often than not, heavily influenced by people and the tribal nature of IT. And this can result in a highly fragmented monitoring environment, either siloed, structured by technical domains, or sometimes clusters of different monitors that may or may not be very well integrated. And the result is, you know, the not my problem syndrome. And I think many of us are unfortunately painfully familiar with this experience. You know, our customer is seeing red, and when we begin investigating it, we look at all of our monitors, and all of our monitors are telling us they're all green. So that's a painful experience I think a lot of us have had. So what does ITIL say about monitoring? Well, monitoring, and especially the monitoring of technology, is closely related to ITIL's event management process. And the event management process purpose is to detect events, make sense of those events, and determine the appropriate control action. So the event management process really provides a trigger for many other ITIL processes, and I've only shown some of them here. So ITIL's orientation is very much weighted on operational monitoring and control. But here's what ITIL's Continual Service Improvement publication says about monitoring. It says it's an ongoing cycle and is fundamental to the delivery, support, and improvement of services. It also says that while it's performed by service operations functions, it provides a basis for setting strategy, designing and testing services, and improvement. So it seems pretty clear to me that ITIL views monitoring as, you know, pretty important to IT service management. So how about DevOps? What does DevOps say about monitoring? Well, DevOps is much less prescriptive than ITIL, but monitoring is no less important from a DevOps perspective. Monitoring and measurement is part of the conceptual comms framework that DevOps talks about, and it refers to ensuring that there are mechanisms in place that can provide visibility into all systems and events. Now, because DevOps seeks to accelerate the flow across the service lifecycle, testing and monitoring are, quote, shifting left. So, it's shifting left so we can try and catch errors as early as possible. Now, DevOps also seeks to design monitoring into as part of service design. So we really want to design self-healing properties into our IT services as part of design as well. That's a DevOps concept. So what else does DevOps say about monitoring? Well, as with any movement, there are many opinions, and they range from monitoring sucks to monitoring love. Now, on the left, I've shown a survey that suggests that satisfaction with monitoring has actually declined from last year to this year. And on the right, I've got a quote from Gartner suggesting, they suggested that 2017 will be the year of monitoring in DevOps. But at any rate, monitoring's focus based on this quote is, they're saying, is actually moving from left to right, which in this case would be from pre-production to post-deployment, which is really the opposite of what we normally hear about shift left. So there's a lot of opinions around monitoring. But here is something I'm hoping that we can all agree on. When we collect data and place it in a service-oriented context, we begin to create information. And this can improve visibility, and both IT service management and DevOps would say this is a very good thing. When we take data and make it visible to stakeholders in context, for example, a service-oriented context, or maybe based at a point in time. This is what we refer to as visibility. And these are the charts and graphs and reports you see from almost all monitoring products today. But analytics is what takes the data and information and creates actionable knowledge of what to do with the information, whether that's remediation action or some other automated operational activity. This creation and sharing of knowledge increases transparency and improves organizational trust, which can accelerate IT transformation. So there's a quote, circle of trust that needs to be facilitated and is really needed to facilitate cultural change, right? So both visibility and transparency are needed to remain in what I'm calling the circle of trust here. So again, before we move on, we want to take another quick poll. Karen, I think we've got another quick poll, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we do. Who makes major IT technology monitoring decisions in your organization? Do you have a dedicated monitoring group or team? Is it IT operations or the operations bridge? Perhaps it's your application development group? Maybe each area makes their own selection, or other. Please make your selection. Okay, John. We have, looks like the lead, well, right now it looks like the lead is that there's a dedicated monitoring group or team.
That's very interesting.
That's encouraging.
It is encouraging because it typically in the past has been very much scattered. So that's a good trend.
It is. Okay, we have about 70% have voted. I'll give you just a couple more seconds to make your selections, and then we'll close the poll. Okay. So we have 36%, John, have a dedicated monitoring group, followed by 31% IT operations or the operations bridge. And then we've got a tie for third at 17%. Each area makes its own selection or other. And nobody has applications development making the decisions.
That's interesting. Very good. Thank you, everyone, for those responses.
And John, I just wanted to say, I did have a chat. Lauren did chat in on the first, on the last poll.
Sure.
On how does your organization manage transformational change today? And she said one person is assigned, very little time devoted for them to be successful.
Yeah, that goes to sponsorship, right? So transformational change and changing behaviors to do it successfully really, when we talk about things like a wake-up call and changing behavior, that really needs to start right at the top, right? And so very difficult to do transformational change bottom up is the reality. And
Roger has a comment for you as well on the who makes the major IT technology monitoring decisions. And Roger said, government clients make monitoring decisions. Monitoring decisions are random and unfocused.
Yeah, and that's part of because monitoring has a broad scope, right? And event management interfaces with a lot of different processes. There's many different use cases, and so it's not, it's a challenge. Even having a dedicated monitoring group or team needs to deal with diverse stakeholders. It's a huge challenge, and the monitoring technologies tend to focus on different areas. Very few have a broad scope. So good. Thank you very much for those responses, and thank you for the comments. Keep them coming. I think the more dialogue for me, the more engagement, the better. All right. So what I wanted to do now is kind of shift gears and then start talking a little bit about, you know, what are ways, what are some really basic ways that we can leverage monitoring in an IT service management and a DevOps led transformation. And anytime we do a poll, I have to reset my mouse, so that's why there's a little delay here, sorry. All right, so first, this is really best practice, right? You need to get an honest view of your starting point. Monitoring projects must anticipate people and process interfaces. And I will tell you, more monitoring projects I've worked with have been derailed by people issues by far than by technical challenges. It's not even close. So you really need to be realistic about your current organizational capabilities. Do you have people and processes in place that will allow you to do a lot of integration, for example? Do you do a lot of software development, or are you mostly third-party software packages? Of course, you should take an inventory of what tools are being used, by whom, and for what, if you're able to do that. Charting a course to a new monitoring environment, the cloud, or anywhere else for that matter, is not going to help you if you don't know where you are right now. So this is really kind of basic. And it leads us to one of the basic challenges that we've seen for most customers. Most customers' current environments are somewhere in between cloud native and traditional physical and virtual environments. Again, the question is not necessarily where we're going, but how do we get there? Analyzing your existing requirement is part of what we mean by understanding where you are right now. And the reality for most of the clients that we've seen is it's really a hybrid mix of legacy and virtualized infrastructures, typically the starting point, and there's probably some experimentation with containers and other cloud native technologies. That's the typical starting point that we've seen. So once you understand where you are, the next suggestion would be to do a quick analysis of your service measurement requirements. And this is pretty important since it's the service that's going to help you keep people focused and avoid those turf battles that don't always link back to business value drivers. And so although it's possible for priorities to focus on either customer-facing or supporting IT services, it's usually important that it be part of a roadmap that ultimately links back to a clear vision and mission. So you could start with a supporting IT service as long as eventually there's a clear understanding that we want to the end game, right, is identifying digital business services, right? That's why we have so much focus these days on end user experiences and business transactions. So be careful though when you ask, what do we want to measure? Obviously, if you ask a developer, they're going to want to monitor applications. You ask an operations person, they might want to monitor infrastructure. When you ask a service owner, they may just want to monitor end user experience. So each answer tends to change the scope of your monitoring analysis, in some cases significantly. So don't confuse the top-down design questions about ideal service targets with the bottom-up questions about what needs to be instrumented for data collection. They're two different. Understand the targets first and then worry about what data to collect. And I will also tell you that in most cases, your greatest costs are going to be associated with making sense of events across end-to-end IT services. That's where your greatest potential for improvement lies, not just in collecting huge amounts of data. So, of course, once the targets are agreed, the next step is to establish a baseline, and this is a fundamental best practice. And ideally, these baselines would incorporate business transaction health and end user experience elements, hopefully associated with customer-facing IT services, but it would also include the supporting application and infrastructure as part of that end-to-end service baseline. So it's important, if you're able to have that end-to-end service baseline have a little bit of depth to it as well. It'll be a more informative baseline. Now, finally, you need to validate, if you're looking at monitoring products, you need to validate the tool's analytics capabilities. And as we said earlier, analytics has, I don't know if I said this earlier or not, but analytics has become almost as big a buzzword as transformation. But what analytics does is it discovers patterns in data, and it can help us answer questions like, what happened and why, or what's happening now, what's going to happen next, and so forth. Analytics is also a broad area, and analytics are used by both business and IT. A key benefit of analytics is really connecting those dots between the service abstraction and the underlying components. Of course, business analytics could be used for many other purposes as well. From an ITSM and DevOps perspective, it's the service orientation is really most important. And this service-oriented context really can't be understated. ITIL's basic definition of a service applies whether the service is an end-to-end digital business service, a monolithic application service, or even a microservice. It's the service definition that provides the context needed to understand both business impacts and their dependencies. So again, connecting the dots between the service abstraction and the underlying components is really where the devil meets the details.
John?
Yes?
Greg is asking, don't you need to know the current baseline before setting the targets?
Well, it's chicken and egg, right? So you can identify what's critical to the business, and ideally those baselines will help inform where your improvement efforts begin. So if I have 3 critical business services, I might look at those as my top 3 targets. I might want to get a baseline of those, and then based on what information the baseline gives us, for example, if I'm having performance issues with a particular service, that might be a target I want to start with. Although I will say that, and you get this right from the ITIL books, right? It's not always a good practice to start with your most difficult challenge right off the bat. Something that will have value to the business, but that's not, a Mount Everest of difficulty to start with is probably a good practice. But that's a good question. So hopefully that's something I'd love to talk offline about, but that's my answer.
Thank you, John.
No problem. Keep them coming. So where was I? So again, what we want to do is connect the dots between this abstract notion of a service and the underlying components, and that's really the difficulty when it comes to monitoring. There's also different techniques that analytics can use, and I've got a couple of them here. So, for example, event correlation makes sense of events, and we do that by isolating the root cause versus the effects of events. Now, this is different than event filtering, which just looks to reduce overall event volume, and those two are often confused. Other approaches to analytics is through pattern recognitions, which looks at history, maybe for post-factor diagnosis or for trending and capacity planning activities. We might also use analytics to aggregate metrics. For example, aggregate metrics associated with a server farm or an availability zone. And finally, there's artificial intelligence and, and machine learning. And a simple example is self-learning thresholds, which some call predictive analytics. And what this does is it really lets you know that what the threshold is at a particular time of day or day of the week, as an example. So with this, I think, yep, I think we've got our last poll. Is that right, Karen?
Yes, we do. And for this one, what are the major monitoring challenges you're facing today? Perhaps you can't effectively isolate the cause of events. There's no unified of monitoring information. Overall alert fatigue. Perhaps there's no view of customer-facing end-to-end IT services, or other. Please make your selection. Oh. So far down, it looks like no view of customer-facing end-to-end IT services is going to take the lead on this one.
Interesting. Okay.
Oh, sorry, Greg. Greg, it's only set up for picking one, but you can chat in for me. If you chat it in, I can include it for you.
Yeah, I will tell you, to be fair, some of these questions, I feel the audience is paying. There's multiple choices that could apply, so I can relate to their frustration probably a little bit.
Okay, yeah, Greg is saying all of the above for him.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Pick one, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I understand.
And we have another one that says Service Center does not have a unified view of monitoring services.
Yeah.
And Lauren is saying tool failure and no consistent policy. That's tough, no consistent policy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Finish.
This is a tough beast. Wrestling monitoring to the ground can be a tough challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. We're going to close that poll. And here we have 32%, John, no view of customer-facing end-to-end IT services. 23% is other, and you heard some of those comments.
Yeah, I'd love to. Will I be able to see the chat after the webinar? I'd love to be able to, particularly if they have continuing questions, I'd love to be able to have a dialogue if customers are interested or if people are interested.
And those of you that, the 23% that said other, if you want to chat in more comments, that's fine as well. You know, we're happy to listen to that and hear what you have to say. And then we've got a tie at 16%. We can't effectively isolate the cause, and 16% of no unified of monitoring information.
Yeah, yeah. They kind of all go together, right?
Yeah.
So I understand. Yeah.
And 13% came in at the overall alert fatigue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Great. All right. So let me try and summarize what we've discussed, and then we'll open up for overall Q&A. And Karen, you can help me wrap it up.
All righty.
All right. So service management and DevOps involve transformational change, which is largely about organizational development, and people are at its heart. Trust is critical to transformational change, and you can't be in the circle of trust without transparency. Now, when we put data into context, it leads to information and improved visibility, but when we take that information and analyze it, we can create actionable knowledge, and this is what leads to transparency. And effective monitoring is something that can help us accelerate ITIL's DIKW cycle and DevOps' desire for amplified and accelerated feedback. So monitoring really should be a major element of any IT transformation effort, whether that's ITSM, DevOps, or a combination of both. And I mentioned that there are really 4 things that you can do to help leverage monitoring success. And I've used these in the past with some success, not in all cases, but number 1, know your starting point, including your organizational process and technical landscapes. Agree on your service measurement priorities. If you have existing baselines or if you have existing information about where your issues are, that's going to help you in service targeting. But you need to make sure that there is clear agreement on what it is you're trying to do. And then go ahead and re-baseline. That baselining activity is really something that never ends, just like continuous improvement cycles never end. And of course, what's absolutely critical is that you validate any analytics from any vendor, whether that's EG Innovations or anyone else. Put it in your environment and kick the tires and make sure you understand how the analytics works and what they can and can't do. So here are the additional resources I mentioned. There's a link to EG Innovations website. There's resources there. Being First is where the Change Leaders roadmap books were, and Implementation Management Associates also has, I think, some interesting resources. The Being First and the IMA resources are resources that would assist you in transformational change type efforts. So, I found those very useful, and I hope you do as well.